Hello, and welcome to the Never Ending Experiment. This is Kim Anderson, and today I'm going to talk about gender. I wasn't sure if I was going to narrow it down to gender identity, but I was kind of thinking over what I wanted to say, and I think I'm going to leave it a little bit more broad. The other thing is, I wanted to go over the tarot card reading that I did last year, and I said I was going to do an update so we could test out what happens when you try to do a prediction with the tarot cards. Maybe there's not that much relation between gender and tarot. There kind of is. I think that the tarot cards have definitely been used more by women than men. And that could just be because a lot of women get more into intuitive and esoteric activities, spirituality in general, and female prominence, whereas virtually all religions are male dominant. Something that's quite interesting because I know a lot of times people have wondered why women get more into religion if it's so patriarchal. But I think it's really more the spirituality and intuition that's involved in religion or spirituality in general. And I think if we had maybe more open spirituality, that probably it wouldn't necessarily be religion that women run to first. The thing about gender identity, why I didn't want to focus only on that, is sort of my own personal feelings. What I've come to understand about gender, and I use the word gender in terms of the social aspect of gender roles. So obviously there's the biological sex part, and then there's the social gender and gender roles and so on. And I definitely think in terms of gender, I really don't like gender roles myself. I would classify myself as gender nonconforming. And I am quite confidently now on a side that has been mostly ignored, I think, in the major media, which is to go back to the terms that we were using pre-millennium that made a lot more sense. So that would be transsexual, transvestite, as opposed to trans or transgender. And the reason for that is that it's more accurate and it really defines what people feel and how people behave in a way that's a lot more straightforward than what is happening now. There has been a huge shift, and I think the most disappointing thing that's happened, and this is something that I've talked about quite a bit when I talk about politically correct or incorrect terms versus actually correct or incorrect terms. And the fact is that trans and transgender are very, very iffy, fuzzy words. They don't really mean anything clearly. And queer as well is also a very fuzzy word. I was trying to get my head around queer theory, kind of feeling like I was pretty much against it. But it's one of those things, too, that's not necessarily defined the same way. And the fact is that if it is defined the way that a lot of people say it is, which is that queer theory is basically that, everything is queer, or everyone is a little bit queer, that the whole idea of heteronormative sexuality and behavior is constructed and sort of artificially imposed on people, which is fair enough. I can't really argue with that. I mean, I do think there is the biological component of heterosexual attraction that kind of goes through all animals, but it's one of those things that's not clean cut. That's why there is still so much homosexual or transsexual behavior in all species. And none of our behaviors are really absolute. And when you get into complex behaviors, which are very complex, like sex is a complex behavior because it involves more than one person, it involves more than one emotion, it involves a lot of different interactions. And with us, because our cultures are so overwhelming and we focus so much on culture, that influences us enormously. So it's very likely that if you were to take all of this social conditioning away, you would still have most people behave in a roughly heterosexual way, but they might also have quite a lot of homosexual or other type of behaviors as well. I try to look at it objectively. I think a lot of people don't want to look at it objectively because they're really afraid of offending people, which is really a bad position to be in because what that would mean is that people are doing bad things and nobody wants to talk about it. But I don't really see it that way, and I think that it's fair enough to be wary of being clinically analyzed. Scientists are not always the nicest or the smartest people. And so, we have a lot of science that's sort of like duh science, like where you ask really obvious questions and then act surprised when you get obvious answers. But unfortunately, because so much of our behavior is cultural and conditioned, we sometimes don't even know what's what. And that's why a lot of scientific studies get set up to figure out what's really natural and what's really conditioned through culture. And there's no question then when it comes to both sex and gender that both biology and culture are such huge and overlapping influences. I don't believe it's that easy to separate them. And the people that do think it's easy often think that way precisely because of their own individual nature. And a lot of very heterosexual, cisgendered people tend to think that people that don't behave that way are maybe trying to behave that way, and they're the ones that are being socially conditioned. And then vice versa, on the other hand, if you're not cisgendered and you're not heterosexual, that, then you see cisgendered heterosexual people as being performative as well, and you think that they're just behaving according to social conditioning. And I think that's maybe the biggest point that I wanted to make, other than using correct terms, which is that everybody not only has their own sexuality, their own gender identity, they have their own way of seeing gender, period. They have their own way of seeing sex and gender that is also very individual, which is to say their philosophy itself is individual. And I think that's why we have so many arguments and so much disagreement between so many different people. I mean, it's not like all gay people agree on everything to do with what even gay rights mean. I mean, from my perspective, what I would see the progressive view is to stop focusing on marriage so much. I think marriage should be very functional and simple and social and have relatively few legal ramifications. I also think it should be very easy to get divorced. So it's become kind of a weird thing to have these gender roles, especially when traditionally, if you look at the sort of simplest, easiest explanation for gender roles, it all revolves around women giving birth and having small children and nursing them, and the fact that that would take her away from being able to do a lot of other activities. I mean, that's the whole basis of where these gender roles come from. But most of the time, women aren't giving birth and nursing. When you start to look at these different gender roles and different perspectives, you start to see that we are very much a community type of species. So the gender roles themselves, if you, again, going back to this traditional perspective, were often very social. So it was women doing a bunch of work more with other women and men doing work more with other men. It wasn't necessarily a woman on her own at home with children. It wasn't a man on his own going to work by himself. And so that's a twisted sort of way of seeing things that comes more from how our society works now than it does from any tradition. The other aspect of that is again coming back to this economy. So say we go, back in time again, the mother is staying with her children and mostly foraging, which we tend to associate with the women's role, although it's definitely not a strict role. The reason she would forage more is simply because it's physically easier, and the men tend to take the more physically difficult jobs, including hunting. But again, it's not all the time. These aren't hard categories. These are very simple, practical reasons. So we've taken this sort of simple, practical way of doing things, and then labeled all these other associations with it, like as though it's God-given or something like that. And it's like, no, it was really just convenient. It's mostly about convenience. So a man going out hunting or going to war, doing something outside of the community, that's sort of part of those traditional gender roles. But why? Well, because it's just easier for him. Again, it's just convenient. So the idea that a man would go out and make money to come back to his wife who's staying at home by herself with her children isn't the natural gender role at all. It's not actually traditional at all. That's a new fabrication that's sort of translating an old way into a system now that simply doesn't function the way that it used to. So it's really not very practical anymore. And today, what you see, of course, is that most couples do get stuck together in sort of their little nuclear family, and most of the roles are more shared today than they were in the past because they don't need to be different. Once a woman has already nursed the child and is old enough to go to school, for example, there's really no reason for a woman to stay home. It doesn't really make any sense. The whole housewife concept is really only valid for 3 or 4 years when your child is very small. And the idea that you're having a bunch of children one after another, again, is not traditional and it's not biologically intelligent. So there are a lot of reasons why these old traditional gender roles don't work anymore. And I think the assumption that it's like all an ideological change, that people are trying to behave differently, it's like, no, just like most families today can't survive on one income. A lot of them can't even survive on two incomes. So, with that in mind, you can see how totally offensive it would be to try to impose these traditional, so-called traditional gender roles, which again are not really traditional. These new type of gender roles on people at a time where it's literally impossible to live that way, where the worst thing you could do is to have too many children. So it wouldn't even make sense for a woman to stay home alone with a bunch of children because that's just adding to overpopulation and unemployment. So the man is even less likely to be able to get a job, to make the money, to take care of all of these different people now under his care. So it doesn't make sense. It doesn't work anymore. And again, like I said, like if gender roles aren't coming naturally to you, then why would you try to impose them? Because the only reason they ever existed in the first place was purely for practical reasons. So that's gender roles out of the way. Now I'd talk a little bit more about gender identity. As I said, I definitely think we need to go back to using transsexual and transvestite, and it's really for very practical reasons. For myself, like I said, I definitely see myself as gender nonconforming. There was quite a lot of times in my life where I have dressed in a more masculine way, mostly because it's more comfortable. Um, my hair is probably the longest it's ever going to be right now. Is barely even shoulder length. My hair simply doesn't grow. Like I don't have hair that grows long. It won't. It will start to break. It's just that's how it's always been. My hair has never been longer than shoulder length because it won't grow. It's not a gender decision. It's just purely practical again. And I am hypersensitive to a lot of sensations. So for me to dress masculine is actually to just comfortably. I have braces that I have to walk with, so wearing flat shoes is the only option. So many of the clothing choices that I have made that look masculine are actually completely comfortable. And the fact is that most of the clothing that we've made that's comfortable is for men. We seem to want women to be uncomfortable. And for me, since I'm almost always a little bit uncomfortable, I do everything I can to make myself more comfortable. So I'm not going to go out of my way to look feminine, to look anything other than being comfortable because it just doesn't make any sense to me. So that's kind of a weird thing is that these things that we've associated with looking feminine, a lot of them take up a lot of time. A lot of them are very uncomfortable. I mean, some of the studies have shown on average, women tend to be colder overall than men. And then you look at these fancy parties and these different outfits that people are wearing, and women are dressed scantily, and their men are wearing all these layers, but yet men are supposed to be warmer overall. So shouldn't it be the other way around? It's very strange when you start to really analyze it. Gender roles like that don't make a lot of sense at all. I mean, pretty much, again, going back to more indigenous and traditional cultures, both men and women decorated themselves. Both men and women had longer hair, decorated their hair. A lot of those older societies put effort into looking beautiful, but it wasn't just women, it was both men and women. Gender roles have definitely driven me up at the wall a lot, and it is very confusing. And I think because of the changes in queer or LGBTQ um, has, I think, come at a big cost. Because, like I said, if the original meaning of queer theory, that sort of heterosexuality is constructed, by that logic, there shouldn't be any queer community at all because we would all be one community. So, how can you say something is falsely constructed and then exclude the people that seem to be a part of it? You know, definitely the kind of community that I want to be a part of is one where everyone is included. I would not want to be a part of a separate community. Now, because I'm gender nonconforming, then the question would be, well, am I queer? And I don't agree with labeling anyone as queer. And I don't agree with labeling myself as queer. And this is a newfangled thing. Like, this isn't something that's core about being non gender conforming or non heteronormative. That's not a tradition. That's not necessary. And it's not rational. Okay. It doesn't make sense. And I think what's happened now is there's been this blurring of language that's made people really, really confused. And what I've noticed a lot is when they change the language like that, there's a reason for it. And the big reason behind this change is to lead people to surgery and drugs. And this is possibly the biggest issue I have with the changes that have happened in the LGBTQ rights, the T aspect of that getting associated so strongly with medical interference. Now, I absolutely agree that if you want to go down that road and change your body to look more like something else, like that's your choice. I don't think people should be hindered from doing that. However, is that a public health issue? Is that something that's okay for teenagers to do? I think that those questions need to be answered very scientifically and very rationally, and they really need to look at evidence and they need to look at a lot of different people. The other thing is the belief that if you're gender nonconforming, that makes you trans. And this is one of these really, really horrible language abuses that has happened. Trans is a part of a word. It's not a full word. It doesn't make sense to use it on its own. It's not an umbrella term for anything. If you're androgynous, that doesn't mean that you're trans. These are irrational statements that have only come about, I think, in the last 5 years. This is one of those areas that you really have to stop and say, why are you changing the words so much? There's always something going on if they keep changing words. A lot of times it comes from people being sensitive about it, but it's also there are people manipulating the system. If I go back in time to when I was 13 and I was totally rejecting makeup and any kind of hair removal and bras and all of that, I didn't want anything to do with any of it. I just went super, super simple. I stopped cutting my hair. I dressed in really baggy clothing. I realized that it was a scam, that the feminine looking way we were expected to dress was a scam. It was a way to waste your time, waste your energy, look artificial, look younger than you are, which was really creepy. It's like at a time when you're growing body hair and you're being told that you're not supposed to have it is like, what? But that's part of the puberty process, right? So why would I be going back on the changes that are already happening? So none of it made any sense to me, and I just rejected kind of all of it at once. And nobody really made a big deal about it. I definitely got comments like, oh, maybe you're a lesbian or you look like a lesbian. And I knew that I definitely wasn't a lesbian. And I think now I'm a little bit scared about what would have happened because I think probably some adult might have like taken me aside and said, do you feel like maybe you're a man? Do you feel like you want to be a man? And I would have been like, no, not really. I don't want to be a man. I just want some of the benefits. Like, I just want some of what men get to do, which is absolutely nothing. And they don't have to worry about their appearance hardly at all, except maybe to shave their face. You know, they get to wear the most comfortable clothing. They get extra time. They get free time because women are spending all this extra time on their appearance. So for me, it was like, oh, like, I'm kind of glad nobody really interfered. Although I did get tons of interference before that to try to push me into acting and behaving more like a woman. And I didn't want Like, I didn't want to continue that. When I was a girl, it was more like fun. When you're a girl, it's just sparkles and lace and pink, and it seems fun. The way that you present femininity to a little girl is fun, and they're a little bit oblivious, you know. We're presented with all these Disney princesses and stuff, which you really dig into it, are absolutely horrifying tales of patriarchal malevolence that are even worse than what you see in these stories. So very dark, very scary messages that we have transferred on to little girls that mostly don't know much about because it seems fun. You know, I was in dance, I was in music. I learned to put makeup on when I was 5 years old. I had all of that instruction on how to be feminine when I was very young, and I just ate it up because I didn't know any different. You know, and by the time I was a teenager, it was like, oh, wait a second. All of this stuff that I've learned about being feminine, now it's getting worse. Now it's getting really scary. Now it's like they want you to change your body. They want you to be obsessed with being like the perfect wife. And it just disgusted me after a while. And so in the end, I just kind of played around with the gender and I played around with the different ideas behind it, you know. And I didn't want to choose. And I don't think anybody should ever be pressured into choosing. Again, if we go into the authentic side of that queer theory that it's all constructed, then you would never label anyone. So why are we labeling anyone? Why would anybody call themselves queer? So what that's become now to call yourself queer is to make a political statement. But the political statement isn't being heard. It isn't being understood. Most people don't know what it means. A lot of people would say, based on what I've just said, that I would be queer. But if it's all a social construction, then you can't be queer. And you should never label yourself as queer. So there's a lot of hypocrisy going on in the language aspect of the word. But the community aspect of things, I think that has played an important role. The community is important because so many people have been ostracized and discriminated against and even abused. And there's a lot of times and places where homosexual or transsexual people have been murdered or incarcerated for life. There's so many stories, really, really sad stories about how terribly people were treated for something that essentially hurts no one. It doesn't hurt anyone. It does blur the boundaries of what we consider to be normal. But why be normal? Like, I don't understand the benefit of that. I think as humans, if we are advanced and we are intelligent, why wouldn't you want to just be yourself? If it happens to coincide with the gender role and look and aesthetic of your culture, great. And if not, great. Like, why do we have to make such a big deal about it? I do think that over focusing on sexuality and gender identity is taxing. Part of my gender identity is not having one and not needing one. And so why would I ever want to label myself? And why would I want to label myself publicly when it's just about how I'm behaving in my normal life? So I am deeply disappointed by the direction towards labeling and asserting pronouns. I think pronouns should be simplified and not expanded. I think we should only have one third person singular pronoun, she. She is easier to say. Why can't we all just be she? Why do we have to choose one? Why do we have to always call people he or she? Or they. They is confusing because they is also used for someone and you don't know where they are, or they is used for third person plural. So I find that direction to be a great disappointment. And I think this is one of the things too, like, and I know I criticize the left wing so much, and it's not because I'm right wing. I'm not right wing at all, okay? But I want the left wing to do better because I want to be able to support left wing politics. I want a political side that I can get behind. But nearly all of the changes that have happened in the last 10 or 20 years have been a negative change. They've gone towards something that I don't want to get behind. And a lot of that comes from this techno-utopian transhumanist perspective where we just embrace all technology and artifice as though it is fine. But the fact is, we are biological organisms, and too much interference into the ways that our body works can really harm us. And I think we've become blind to those harms. And artificial reproduction is one of those things that has and is creating disease and possibly even more diseases into generations into the future. And that's deeply concerning to me. And it makes me really, really, really sad that that has been associated with the gay community and LGBTQ. I just don't believe that that has been a positive change, because there's been so much focus on having children and using really harmful ways to have children. And I don't understand it, because, again, progress to me would mean less marriage and children, more awareness of overpopulation. So to encourage gay people to get married and have children, to me, doesn't make sense. Again, I don't believe that marriage should be a big focus. I don't see labeling people trans or non-binary as a positive step. I don't want to call myself non-binary. And I do think that we had a lot of things going a lot better back in the 80s and 90s, simply because technology hadn't totally taken over, and also because we were using language a lot more intelligently. Unfortunately, a lot of issues with ethnicity and sexuality today have taken a turn into fuzzy, weird, obscure slang language that really is not good for communicating, because if you say I'm queer, you then have to explain what that means to you, because what it means to you doesn't mean the same thing as the next person who calls themselves queer. And that's why I don't use that word, because it's a derogatory term. So why have we all embraced this? I don't get it. I'm a bit lost. So it's kind of sad, because some people may think that there's progress being made in non-heteronormative people's lives. But for me, it's been, unfortunately, really, really, really depressing and sad. I appreciate intelligence and discussion and using language in a very, very clear way. And I would say that I'm androgynous. I don't really have much of a gender identity. And my personal perspective on gender is stop making such a big deal about it. And I want people to gender bend. I want people to dress and drag. I love these things. I think Drag Race is fun. I think all of that stuff is great. It's celebratory. It's just fun, you know? A lot of drag is really just like clowning around. It's a strong association with humor and comedy, and a lot of it is pretty lighthearted. And that's great, you know, and that's what I want to see more of, is more of the fun part of it, the comfortable part of it. Just dress however you want, you know? I am so sick of people labeling themselves, and I think people get so anxious about it. And I think over discussing it has led to an increase in anxiety about these issues, and the feeling like you need to label yourself. You don't really need to. The only people that need to know that about you are the people closest to you. The world doesn't really need to know exactly what your pronouns are, because if they're talking about you in the third person, that means you're not there. So you don't get to control what people say about you behind your back. You know, I think we need to take a step back and just say there are all kinds of people doing all kinds of different things. And the more that you label people, the more new labels will pop up, because the labels that you set down didn't work. And I've seen the definitions of them change every 2 years. And I'm really tired of this idea that we're supposed to keep up with it. I don't think we need to keep up with it. I think we need to keep it open. I think that their communities should be everyone included. You know, I really don't like the idea of segregation of any kind. And I feel marginalized now by both sides, by both the heteronormative side and the queer side. I don't fit into either. And I think there are more people like me than you might know. Because what I would have to do in order to embrace all these new words and all this way of queer culture would be to shut my brain off, and I don't want to do that. Because language is important. When I decided to become a writer and start writing and speaking, I took the meaning of words very, very seriously. And I want to take that carefully and I want to understand all of the nuance. And we're losing nuance and we're losing the ability to communicate. And also, if you are heteronormative, you don't have to be. There's no reason why anybody has to be heteronormative. If it's comfortable for you, great. But you shouldn't impose that on anyone. And also, you shouldn't impose that on yourself if you're not really comfortable with it. Pretty much everyone I know is going to wear no makeup and sweats some days. And if a man wants to wear makeup and heels and dress a little fancier, like, why not? Like, I just think we need to get over it and just let people be and wear what they want and take the jobs that they want and just work within the constraints of their own lives, because life is getting really weird for people and we just don't know what direction it's going. So when it comes to gender, just get over it. Just be, you know, you don't have to put a lot of effort into it and you don't have to suffer for it either. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that tarot card reading. I mentioned that I was going to go over that. So the tarot card reading, so here's a weird coincidence. I went on TikTok just earlier today and there was an ad on Netflix and it said, "What's coming up for you?" And she turned over the Lovers and then there was another card and then she turned over the Emperor. And so the spread that I did last year had the Lovers and the Emperor. And I was like, ooh, coincidence, hey? So what I interpreted last year, it was a question about my year and how it was going to go. And I've thought about it a little bit. I went over what I said about it last year. And the Lovers was in the past. So then I started to realize, well, I am living with my ex. And we have talked about doing different things. So I thought, maybe that's what it has to do with. And the Seven of Cups is confusion and a lot of different options. And the other thing was I published my book last year and I had a lot of trouble with the self-publisher and I ended up having to do direct publishing, which I was kind of resisting. I didn't really want to get caught up in all those details like margins and fonts and so on, but I did it. I went through it. I got through it. And honestly, the way the publishing world is right now, if you don't have like millions of followers, and I don't have millions of followers, I barely have dozens of followers. So it just didn't work for me. And direct publishing has been the easiest way to move forward. So the Seven of Cups kind of did make sense in that sense that it was a lot of confusion and everything was all over the place, or there was options that I didn't really know what I wanted. And the advice was good. The advice was Emperor and taking control and taking charge. And that's exactly what I ended up doing, right, with direct publishing. And so I think I'm going to continue with direct publishing for my future books. And once you learn all that, all the little details of margins and stuff, it's not such a big deal. The world has really, really changed a lot in terms of book binding and the way that happens now. And most of these publishers will end up going to the same printing presses in the end anyway, as you would do with a direct publisher. So in the end, it is kind of all the same. So the spread could be interpreted in different ways. And the Seven of Cups, was it a year of confusion and options? It was. It was. And I've had a lot of different ideas about what I'm doing and what I want to do next. I do want to do more speaking engagements. That's a big reason why I'm doing this podcast. So if you're looking for a speaker, I am hoping to get more into that. And now I'm going to do a quick one card. I'm just going to pick one card just to see what is the update for whatever the next card would be in relation to what I did last year. Okay, so I'm just going to pick one card. Let's see what it is. The Ace of Pentacles. Well, that's a fun card. It's basically a coin. And that's what I want to see more of, is more coins. So Ace of Pentacles is all about new beginnings, possibly new business. I am thinking about starting a business. I think I mentioned that before. It's a plant company, and I have a number of different interests in plants. So I'm looking forward this year to really getting even more deeply into plants. So that is my business idea. Oh, the other big thing, which maybe connects to seeing that Netflix ad this morning, is a screenplay. I am working on a screenplay. I think in the spring I'm going to be focused a little bit more on that. and hopefully that'll come together. It's been in my head becoming more and more clear, getting more and more details on characters, and it's all set in the future. And I'm very excited about that, and I hope that that will come to fruition this year as well. So let's get that Ace of Pentacles going. And please subscribe to this podcast if you're listening. And thank you for your time. This is Kim Anderson, and this has been The Never Ending Experiment.